Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Saturday, December 16th, 2023, and today we are going to be taking a look at the state of the 2024 presidential election based off of present-day polling data. The reason why I'm doing this is because we've been talking a lot about the general election national numbers that presently show President Trump with a 3.1% advantage over President Biden. Now, the polls nationally reflect a very interesting story, one that is very different from where we were 4 years ago and 8 years ago. 4 years ago, President Biden, at the time, Vice President Biden, was up 5.2%. 8 years ago, Secretary Hillary Clinton was up 5.8%. So 5.2 versus 5.8 now leading into a presidential election year, just 2 weeks away from the new year, with Donald Trump in the advantage by 3.1% nationwide. Every single poll in the past 2 weeks alone showing Donald Trump with an advantage, with the exception of one that shows Joe Biden winning by roughly 1%. Now, to put this into context too about where we were on the presidential margin, in 2020, Joe Biden won the national popular vote by roughly 4.5%. So nearly 5 points across the country. He was up on election day by roughly 7 to 8 points, according to opinion polling data. So it wasn't too far off, but it certainly did overestimate the amount of support that Joe Biden was going to get on election day, which actually tells pretty bad signs for Democrats looking at these numbers. But what's also interesting is looking at the numbers on a state-by-state basis. Historically, when I've done these videos, I've gone through every single state and looked at the polling numbers across states like Montana and Pennsylvania and Texas, and giving a lot of time and effort to states, in some cases where we already know how they're going to go. So for the sake of this video and the sake of spending more time talking about opinion polling data in states where it really does matter a lot more than others, we are going to characterize all of the states that are already going to go for either side of the aisle, meaning all the safe red and blue states, just keeping into consideration some states that might still be very solid in one side and may still end up voting for candidates like Donald Trump by a pretty significant margin on election day. We are going to keep it here as potentially thus a temporary toss-up for right now, so we can look at the numbers and make our distinction and characterization based on where they are right now. So going off of the numbers nationwide, we have some pretty solid states for both sides of the aisle. Polling doesn't really matter here, largely because a lot of the time it's inaccurate, right? Those one-off polls that show that Kentucky is now a 14-point race instead of a 28-point race don't usually end up being true. Only in times where the numbers quite consistent and we've seen a reason for these change do we actually start to believe and lean into those numbers. But for right now, I don't think there's any effort in doing so. And so characterizing them outside of the safe red or blue column does a disservice to everybody. I think looking at our map here, we can reasonably say the remaining states that have yet to be characterized are actually going to be the ones that are decided by roughly 10 points or less. So 230 electoral votes, nearly the deciding number. 270 is what's needed to win here, are the actual states where the actual election seems to be going on. So with 125 electoral votes for the Republicans, 183 for the Democrats, the reason I don't designate candidates yet is largely because we haven't gone through the primary process, but for all intents and purposes, Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee, Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. This is just because we're going to be taking a look at the average across these states, the rough average at least, of where the Democrats or Republicans are leading. In the case of the Democrats, for transparency, we are only using Joe Biden as the metric. There isn't data for Marianne Williamson or Dean Phillips with, versus Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, Donald Trump versus on the Republican side, we are going to see roughly an average of the three. So starting off on this map, I would say, based on the national numbers, we shouldn't expect a Joe Biden victory by these opinion polls. This is very different than anything we've ever dealt with on the national stage since the beginning of this channel. Since 2017 through around the past few months, we have seen clear, consistent leads for Democrats on the presidential level. Whether that's Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren, or even then becoming the nominee, Joe Biden, there were leads across nearly all of the battleground states that were quite consistent, and it really didn't show much of a difference depending on who the Democratic nominee was going to be. This time around, it is very different because the Republicans have the advantage. They have the upper hand for the first time since the 2012 election in many of these states. And so that is a very good thing for some Republicans. They see this as, we're on track for victory, but at the same time, polls weren't super accurate in 2022. So I'm at a point where I don't lean into the polls as much as I used to. I used to give them a lot more faith. I thought 2016 was a fluke, and then it became 2020, and then it became 2022. I do think there's validity in them, though. I do think they deserve attention. I think they deserve to be included in analysis, but I don't think they should be everything. For the sake of this video, though, they are everything, because I think it'll help us paint out this story a little bit more and put into context the national numbers so we can understand where the support is coming from. So let's start off on the West Coast and move our way over to the East Coast, just for the sake of simplicity. We'll start off in the state of Nevada. Now, this one in particular I find to be very interesting because there isn't much data on the primary side or in the general election. From what is included on the general election side, we really only see polls between Trump and Biden, not really DeSantis and Biden or Haley and Biden in Nevada. I'd be interested to see how the margins improve or not, depending on who's being put up against each other in these states. But right now, Nevada currently has the Republicans with roughly a 4-point advantage across the state. So thus, that would characterize it as a lean red state, anywhere between 1 to 5%. Moving over to the state of Arizona, there's quite a bit of data here. This is certainly going to be one that Democrats are going to be fighting for heavily because they have an abortion referendum that will coincide on the ballot. Currently speaking, the Republicans are up also by a lean margin here. Polls show Ron DeSantis winning, Nikki Haley winning, but on average, Donald Trump is up by around 5 points across the state. For context, he won the state in 2016 by 3.5, lost Nevada by 2.4%. Now, heading over to the state of Colorado, we have seen numbers that are still consistent with where it was in the last election, just slightly underperforming for President Biden. He won by 13.5 in the last election. Recently, he shows being up 9 to 10 points. So a few points in terms of a reversion, but still Colorado, surprisingly enough, is a state that Democrats can at least reasonably rely on. I think it's one where even in 2022, despite Republicans nominating a pro-choice Senate candidate and trying to really win over many of the voters in that state, Colorado still said they are fundamentally opposed to Republicans, and we actually saw Democrats do even better than Joe Biden did in a off-year race. So it's very interesting, or a midterm race where that isn't entirely expected with an unpopular Democratic incumbent. So moving over to the state of New Mexico, this is one where we actually just saw a very interesting court case. Democrats just won successfully a court case in New Mexico with redistricting. And so we will see Democrats likely have increased turnout on that, but I'm interested to see what it looks like on the polling side of things. Very similar to Colorado, it is likely blue, but I want to see how more data as it comes in starts to build out a better picture about where the congressional races are going to go and where the presidential race is going to go, because our last poll here actually is from August. So we don't have much data out of New Mexico. I see why there isn't much of a need for it, but it's still going to be quite interesting, and it's still 5 electoral votes, and considering how close this election might be, it could very well make a difference. Now in Texas, for the 2024 election, Donald Trump has maintained a similar lead to where he was in 2020, just slightly improving. He's up around 8 points across the state. He won by 5.6 in the last election. In 2016, he was up by 9 points on election day, ended up winning. Sorry, not 9 points. Was up by larger than 9 points, I think around 12 points, ended up winning by 9 points. So in some cases, Texas underestimates Democrats. Some cases, it overestimates Democrats. It really just depends, but right now, Donald Trump is averaging around an 8-point advantage across the state of Texas. Although the last poll was done in October, we can still, trust it at least right now because we haven't seen much of a change in terms of national numbers since then. Now, for the state of Iowa in 2024, pretty consistent leads as well for President Trump. He has always been able to do quite well in this state, and that's not really much of a shock. He was able to take it from a Obama plus 6 state and Obama plus 6 state in 2012 and turned it into a Trump plus 8 state, then win it again in 2020. So I would say for me, I don't really put much stock into Iowa being a swing state as much as I used to. I think there definitely could be some competitive elections, but I don't think it would be on the presidential, and the polls reflect exactly that. Now for Nebraska's 2nd district, unfortunately, we don't have any opinion polling data. I would say, and this might be surprising, but right now, I would say Joe Biden is probably still the favorite in Nebraska 2nd. I think the reason for that is because we have seen a pretty consistent shift from this district away from Republicans that are viewed as Make America Great Again. Even though Republicans did try to intentionally draw the district more Republican, they did actually. They shifted about 3 points to the right from where it was back in 2020. Even with that being taken into account, I do think this district still leans towards President Biden, especially given the nature of it being a very suburban area and one that cares a lot about Romney versus Trump Republicans and has rejected a lot of the Trump Republicans since then. Now we move over to Minnesota at large, or not Minnesota at large, Minnesota not done by congressional district. I was thinking about Nebraska, but Minnesota currently has President Biden up by 2.5%. My most recent presidential election video, I said that I thought Minnesota was going to stay blue. I still stand by that. I think it will, but right now Biden is not up by nearly the 8-point margin that he was back in 2020. Wisconsin, Trump and Biden are tied, surprisingly enough. Overall, and this also might come into, account for 2024, the vice presidential pick, if Nikki Haley's doing well here, if Ron DeSantis is doing well here, I don't imagine Donald Trump will choose Ron DeSantis. Nikki Haley, I'm not too far away from seeing her being VP, but I don't think it's going to happen as of right now. Wisconsin being a tie, I think that looking at some of the data that shows DeSantis and Haley actually doing better than Biden, I would argue Wisconsin narrowly goes into the Republican column for the sake of characterizing every state that we have right now. So Wisconsin, I would say, tilts towards the Republicans, but again, the data is so different here that it could realistically go either way depending on future polls that come into the fray. But for right now, Wisconsin, I would say, is red. Now, Michigan has been surprisingly enough a state that Democrats have been losing quite a bit of support in opinion polls. Biden hasn't led in a poll since early October, and then since then, one poll from Emerson shows him with a 2-point lead, but everywhere else has shown 5, 10, 4-point advantages for Donald Trump, averaging to a 4.8% advantage across the state of Michigan. Not a good look for Democrats whatsoever, but again, polls can change. Ohio in 2024 shows Donald Trump with a 10-point advantage. That's not really surprising. Donald Trump won the state by 8 points in the last election, but it getting double digits tells you that at least something is shifting about the tides. Pennsylvania in Trump versus Biden in 2024, amongst other Republicans too. Republicans are up on average by around 1 point. DeSantis and Haley actually seem to underperform in some states, Pennsylvania being one of them. Donald Trump still in the advantage over Joe Biden by roughly 1.4%, so you're seeing an average of around a 1-point advantage for the GOP. But still a victory, and one that I think they're very happy about. So the present numbers are 249 for the Republicans, 209 for the Democrats. Now let's move down the... Actually, let's complete the East Coast. That way we can just go ahead and get through it and go down to the southern states because they're a little bit more interesting in terms of recent competitive elections. New Hampshire right now, surprisingly enough, I would say, because it is such a swing state, shows Joe Biden with an 8.6% advantage. The interesting thing about that is because it shows Joe Biden with a larger advantage than where he was in the last election. He won the state of New Hampshire by roughly 7 points. In 2024, he's expected to win it by 8.6%. So that's really interesting. I don't know how much I think that is fully accurate or in line with what we've seen nationally, but weirder things have happened. And I'm not here to reject data simply because I don't think it matches, but I'm going to call it out and say it doesn't match the general trends we've seen from Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, but also, they didn't exactly match in 2020. Nevada didn't move. In fact, shifted slightly right from 2016, whereas New Hampshire shifted around 7 points to the left. So they don't always come as a grouping. Swing states are not a monolith. It's just interesting to see a difference there. And so for the state of Maine, I would say right now, where Trump and Biden are, Biden's up around 11 points, not much different from where he was back in 2020. So I'd say Donald Trump wins the 2nd district by roughly a similar margin. Unfortunately, right now we don't have much polling in the 2nd district. There's not a lot of money to do it, and there's not a lot of focus on it, but it shows, I would say right now, Donald Trump is probably in the advantage. Moving down to Virginia, in 2024, Democrats on average are up here by around 6 points. Still a likely state, but was double digits in the last election. Joe Biden won it by 10.1% this time. He's averaging around a 6-point advantage. As for North Carolina, and again, number update, 250 for the GOP, 226 for the Democrats. North Carolina in 2024 shows Donald Trump recently with roughly a 5.5% advantage across the state. Not much polling done with Haley or DeSantis here, but it's a significant victory for Donald Trump because Biden only lost the state in the last election by 1%. So to see quite a significant shift in the past 2 months from a 1% state to now potentially a 6-point state, the most recent poll showing Donald Trump with a 9-point advantage according to Bloomberg. That's scary, I think, for Democrats because North Carolina is absolutely on their radar, but if they're losing it by 6, chances are they're not winning the election. So right now, Republicans are roughly 4 electoral votes away from winning the presidency, and with Georgia, they do it. Joe Biden is losing Georgia right now in the polls by 5 points or more, depending on the candidate there. So right now, Donald Trump on average has a 5.2% lead over Joe Biden in the state of Georgia, which is a huge shift back to where it was back in 2016 when Clinton lost the state by roughly the same margin. I think it was even 5.3% in 2016. So right now, to have the Republicans in the advantage by a similar margin shows a reversion that I don't think Democrats are super happy about, but again, is in line with what we've seen on the national numbers. The final thing here is the state of Florida. Donald Trump with a near double-digit lead on average, but still not enough, roughly an 8-point lead. And DeSantis as well, Haley as well in these states. So pretty consistent down Florida, which is a state where Democrats were hopeful might be competitive again in 2024, but the data right now doesn't seem to suggest it. So here's our map. Here's our map with all of the polling taken into account. 312 electoral votes for the Republicans, 226 for the Democrats. Definitely a much more grimmer look than where we were 4 years ago today. I think the Democrats are going to look at this too and see where they need to play defense strongly, right? They've lost the Rust Belt, they've lost the Sun Belt, but they're able to hold on at least right now with the current state of Biden's approval and, the way that young voters and engaged voters view the presidency, Donald Trump, RFK Jr., whatever it might be. They still have advantages in these states: Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia, Minnesota, and New Hampshire. The unfortunate reality is those are all the states Hillary Clinton was also able to win back in 2016. And so if this map ends up being true, it would end up being an even worse margin than what Hillary Clinton got back in 2016, which is not the place you want to be as an incumbent for very obvious reasons. With that being said, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada are all within the, less than 5% margin right now in terms of polling. Pennsylvania and Nevada are within a reasonable margin of error. So if those states start to peel, Democrats do have a pathway moving forward. But it is quite interesting to see that just 4 years ago, we were talking about how Republicans could potentially hold on with Donald Trump losing across many of these states. Now it seems like the sides have flipped. And so Democrats are losing in a bunch of battleground states where they won back in 2020. And now it's going to be about a fight and clawing their ways back to the leads in these very, very important states. Maybe the issues with the indictments and whatever comes out of the trial with the grand jury could end up impacting this race quite significantly. And it looks like Democrats are going to need that to happen based on where they are right now. At the same time, these numbers could hold out being true. I think there is going to be a lot of movement between now and Election Day. By no means is the 2024 election at all declared for either candidate, and neither of them, I think, are the very clear favorites at this point in time. I think Donald Trump is doing the best he has done in the past 8 years, but sometimes that isn't enough. And I think there are going to be obstacles that he hasn't faced yet, issues that he hasn't confronted yet or tackled yet, that will serve to his detriment, that I think we have already expected and can expect to come to reality, issues with the criminal court proceedings that have shown in opinion polling data to vanquish Donald Trump's lead. Even most recent national numbers show that if Donald Trump is convicted, 59% of Americans commit not voting for him. That's a huge chunk of Republicans, nearly 1/5 of the already saying I'm voting for Trump voting bloc. If he is convicted, put that into reality, this map changes significantly. So a lot can change between now and Election Day, but currently speaking, the Republicans have the clear advantage on polls and where they are, and I think this is a warning sign to many Democrats that a lot needs to change in the next 11 months. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.